Former New York Times opinion page editor Bari Weiss claims that her bosses refused to publish an op-ed submitted by Republican Senator Tim Scott without first getting approval from the Senate's top Democrat, Chuck Schumer. 'Cause that's how journalism works. Weiss, who resigned from the Times 2 years ago, made the allegation during an interview with Scott on her podcast. Listen.
There was a discussion about the piece and whether or not we should run it. And one colleague, a more senior colleague, said to a more junior colleague who was pushing for the piece, "Do you think the Republicans really care about minority rights?"
Wow.
And the more junior colleague said, "I think Tim Scott cares about minority rights." And then, and here's the pretty shocking part, the more senior colleague said, "Let's check with Senator Schumer before we run it." And the colleague, the younger one, refused.
What a stunning allegation, Kennedy. And the New York Times, they say they never seek outside approval or consultation about publishing an op-ed. But the reality is the op-ed never published. The other reality is Senator Tim Scott was a leading voice on police reform. He was proposing the Justice Act. I was in a room with him and victims of police brutality with President Trump and Tim Scott, and I watched him be a healing voice during George Floyd at a time when there was so much hostility. Yes. This is the op-ed America needed to hear. And even if they didn't need to hear it, the point is you don't check with the opposition party before you publish an op-ed.
No, that is so incredibly unethical, especially from the New York Times. Bari Weiss, very, very talented writer and editor. They shouldn't have lost her, but she could not in good conscience stay there knowing what was happening. And she said conservatives were left to fight in what she described as an illiberal environment. And, you know, she was talking about this on her podcast. People did need to hear what Senator Scott was saying from not only his personal perspective, but his expertise on this issue. And he made the good point during the podcast. They didn't want a solution. They wanted this issue to keep going. And shame on anyone who's so unserious about that, watching cities burn and, you know, watching law enforcement be denigrated to the point where communities are now unsafe because in many cities, they did defund a lot of the police, and vulnerable citizens, you know, who would have benefited from Scott's guidance are, you know, now left with unsafety.
You're exactly right. And you can't help but think of the Tom Cotton op-ed that the New York Times published. And then under pressure, they said, oh, this actually didn't meet our standards. Well, the New York Times standards seem to be we check with the other party before publishing Republicans. And we'll rescind an op-ed if we get criticism, if it's Republican.
Right. You know, there's jokes saying that the legacy media are stenographers for the White House or for the Democratic Party. This kind of proves that. You know, it's amazing that every now and then we get like a nugget like this. But we have to imagine that wasn't just a one-off dynamic. This was in a meeting with people openly discussed, an older colleague obviously thinking that they were going to move the younger colleague along. What I'm thrilled about is that the younger person was sticking with, no, that's not fair, because it is inherently unfair. That you can disagree with it especially, but that is the nature of a platform for conversations, is you have all of these kinds of perspectives, especially from a black man who understands the history, who understands poverty, who has a different grasp, even whether he's a Republican or Democrat. Black people in this country have a different experience. It is true no matter what role in life they have, no matter what their economic status is. And it's important to recognize that across the board. So I think that that is one of the other things with our politically fraught situation, is traditionally Americans have looked to the media, print media, radio, and certainly now television, for a perspective of what's happening, not what we're supposed to be indoctrinated with. Well, you know, and they're doing it in schools, they're doing it to adults through media, and Americans see this as well. Sales have gone down, ad buys have gone down, and so the Americans are choosing based on what they choose to read and watch. So it's a shame, but I'm not surprised.
Not at all, because the Washington Post, remember when Senator Scott was announced to give the rebuttal to the joint address to Congress from Biden? Washington Post immediately publishes a fact check of his family history. These seem like 2024 takedowns. Tim Scott's name has been in the mix. DeSantis's name has been in the mix. 60 Minutes did that hit piece on DeSantis. It's like whack-a-mole, whoever seems to be on the rise.
So you see this at a very high level happening, but it happens to every member of Congress. You're asked to respond to any crazy thing that any Republican ever says as you walk off the House floor. Democrats are never asked about any of the crazy things that AOC or the squad says. But here's what I find interesting. Here you have an African-American Republican senator who's going to comment on minority rights, and the New York Times asks an old white Democrat if they can publish it, and we're saying we're not racist. What the hell is that?
That's right. Tim Scott said this, Doctor. So there is something in national media that wants to frame any conservatives, particularly black conservatives, as being disingenuous or insincere or a tool for the conservatives.
This is so disheartening. I mean, who is Schumer? Is he the godfather? Is he the gatekeeper? Who is he to determine whether it should be published or not? But to see them deprive this senator of his ability, his opportunity to express himself, it's his right. Just like it is for the rest of us. You know, I'm a daughter of immigrant parents who came to Ellis Island over 50 years ago. And they, just like every other American, worked hard to achieve the American dream, to have opportunity. And yet we see them trying to deprive this of Senator Scott. That is wrong.
I like that. Level. The Godfather, Chuck Schumer. Terrifying, right? On a Friday afternoon.
He loves it, though. He's like, yeah, I am the Godfather. This is great.
I'm the Godfather. At this point, right?
Oh, my goodness.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.